Okay, so we're talking about the lie of the land now. And my screen looks blurry, but I'm hoping that's just me. Anyway, so we're dealing with part 3 of this little trilogy of episodes. It started with Extremis. And I found out really late to the party that Toby Whithouse was working on this. I assumed that because Moffat did Extremis, and I'm pretty sure the Pyramid at the End of the World was a collaboration. I thought he would have his hands in this, but no, it's a solo effort by Whithouse, and I really wasn't sure what to expect going in because, uh, for the most part, I've liked Whithouse's Doctor Who work. I really like Vampires of Venice and The God Complex, and I quite enjoyed his two-parter from last series, Before the Flood, and I forget what the name of the other part was, but like the Flood two-parter. I really enjoyed those episodes. School Reunion is a bit iffy. I've done a whole live stream podcast over on Lucy's channel about how I felt about that episode, so go over there to check that out. And A Town Called Mercy was real weak. But for the most part, I'd say he's a good writer for Doctor Who. I haven't really experienced any of his stuff outside of Doctor Who. I've watched a few episodes of Being Human. I'm not sure how many, if any, that I saw were done by him, but The Lie of the Land, I'd say, is one of his weaker episodes, probably his weakest Doctor Who episode, which is a bit of a bummer. Although I might as well preface this whole thing by saying that even though I'm going to be mostly negative, the main thing that I can say in this episode's defense is that it does not ruin the previous two episodes for me, which was always a possibility. Like, I know a lot of people who enjoyed Extremis and the Pyramid at the End of the World as much as I did were really nervous that the third part, not sticking the landing, could, like, make the whole trilogy kind of weak as a piece, and I think we managed to avoid that. I think that going back and looking at Extremis and Pyramid, that my ultimate disappointment with The Lie of the Land isn't going to negatively impact how I rewatch those episodes, because really the big problem with The Lie of the Land for me, well, there's two big problems. One is the ending, but even worse than the ending, I think, is how... So, we're picking up after the end of Pyramid, where Bill has essentially signed the planet over to the monks, and over the course of a few months, they've, like, given all of these memories and whatnot to humanity about them having been around forever and them having influenced human growth and human achievement, and they're in charge, and so it's a dystopia. But it's a real sort of generic, obvious dystopia that I don't like. I don't like how it's a dour, dreary, colorless, everyone dresses in the same colors, and everyone is miserable dystopia. I would have liked for it to have been a more subtle dystopia. Like, a lot of why I felt so tense with the end of Pyramid is that we really have no clue what the monks are going to do to the planet. It could have been bad, or it could have even possibly been a good thing. And the Doctor, in like his first real scene of the episode, is like pretending to be on the monk's side, and he makes a point about how the monks might have some benefits to humanity that's regressing rather than evolving. And I don't know, I'd have just liked it if the episode maybe allowed for there to actually be a point to that. Like, don't. It feels like the real easy, cowardly way to write this episode to just say, oh, the monks have to be stopped because look how obviously bad they are. Like, any there's no question. I'd like there to be a question as to whether the monks maybe should be allowed to stick around or not. That could be really complex. Like, I feel like just letting the monks be, oh, they're generic evil dictators who will just kill you over anything and just want everyone to live in fear. That's too simple, I think. Like, the previous two episodes are too complex for the ultimate payoff to just be a real generic, real, this is every dystopia you've ever seen. I don't know. Like, make the world under the monks sort of maybe brightly colored. Maybe some people actually do get to have fun. Maybe people feel like they have free will, and not just because of hypnosis, but because the monks are cleverer than that. I don't know. Like, and even if you weren't going to go that route, I feel like we should know more about, okay, what is an average day under the monk's rule? What does that look like? And we never find out about that. And the lighting is really bad here. I'm getting distracted by how poorly my own face is lit. I hope this isn't bothering anyone else. But, yeah, it's a real problem for me how nothing the monks' actual ruling the world is. It's just a means to an end, and it feels real weak. Like, if I were writing this story, I would make it more about, okay, what is life like under these things, and is there maybe some nuance to how good or bad it is? But instead, and like, does the doctor maybe have a reason to possibly side with them? I don't know. Because the doctor brings up fascism and humankind moving backwards rather than forwards and ignoring history. And I know that there's some people who accuse this episode of being too on the nose, but he's making a lot of salient points. Like, you could make a very ironclad argument that, yeah, humanity is worse now than it's ever been, or at the very least, it's not improving. I mean, I know that there are some people who just don't like this show getting into politics, or don't like their fiction in general being super political, but I don't know. Now is a time more than ever I feel like it's warranted. I live in the most powerful country in the world, and, like, we are, like, rocketing toward fascism more and more with every passing moment, and it feels like the world is becoming a scarier and scarier place with every hour. Like, you hear something terrible, and it's getting a bit overwhelming, and I'm sort of scared at this point. And a show like Doctor Who really seriously talking about how maybe being taken over would be better for humanity. Maybe humankind really cannot be trusted with their own well being. And maybe even a character like, as pro free will and as idealistic as the Doctor, feeling like humankind needs to be reined in. Like, I don't know, there's something to that. Because it makes me think of how a decade ago, the Time Lord Victorious was the scariest thing. Like, the Doctor deciding that humanity is in his hands and he's going to basically play God was a real scary thing. I feel like there's precedent for, in this day and age, you do the Time Lord Victorious or something similar as almost a positive. As like, yeah, the Doctor deciding who lives and who dies and what matters in history and whether or not he can change whatever he feels like is frightening, but is it perhaps less frightening than just letting humankind do whatever? Because we've proven time and time again that we do not learn from history and that we are not ultimately a force for good on our own planet. And I feel like the episode just it's close to talking about those things, but just when it starts to make a point, it stops and it chickens out, and that's a real disappointment to me with how much I feel like Extremis and Pyramid were both talking about really interesting ideas, not necessarily political ideas, but like really dark, sort of cynical ideas, following those through, not chickening out of it. And this episode just didn't really do that. Like, I get it if it's the last part of the trilogy, you want it to have the happy, idealistic ending, but prior to that ending, this episode really needed to be more about the monks maybe being more for our own good than we are. Even if it doesn't ultimately come down on that being the case, I feel like this would be a brilliant episode if we just didn't chicken out and if we allowed ourselves to really just say point blank, humanity has gotten kind of bad and maybe it's time that we stop. I don't know. Maybe even just insinuating that in an episode, even with a happy ending, is too cynical for this show or too cynical for what Whithouse wanted, but I don't know. And I guess I should talk about the ending, because this is probably going to be shorter. I'm at 12 minutes already, but I don't really have too much to talk about with this episode outside of that I feel like the premise was sort of wasted, the dystopia was kind of lame, and the ending, which is Bill using like the the image in her head of her mother to counteract the monks like programming, and I've been thinking about it, and it really doesn't make any sense. Like, I can make an inference. I could maybe, if I wanted to stretch, say that like it's an untouchable pure idea because it's not something that actually exists. Like, Bill doesn't have actual memories of her mother. She has an idea that she's formed in her head based on pictures and what she wants. And it's a pure sort of ideal of love. And so she overrides the monks' rule with the very thing that they needed to take over in the first place, and that's love. And she is sort of using a falsehood to break a falsehood. And what does that say about her? That she's lying to destroy another lie. But at that point, I feel like I'm giving the episode too much credit because it doesn't talk about any of those things. And so it just comes off as like, oh, Bill really loves her mom, and that I don't know, I don't understand. I can't even dismiss what the episode is trying to say because I don't understand what it's trying to say. Like, it's clearly not as simple as love is the emotion and that, like, snaps humanity out of their funk. That's not what's going on, but what is going on, I have no clue. And, I don't know, it just comes off real weird. And, I don't know, I think out of all the episodes we've had this series, out of all the episodes of Series 10 so far, excluding Knock Knock, I think this is the weakest conclusion just because I don't know what's going on. And it felt like it went by real fast for how little it felt like was I don't know. This episode did not feel its length, and yet I really wish it did. I wish that, I don't know. Because I'm not sure what you take out. I don't necessarily take out Bill and Nardole finding the doctor. Don't take out them meeting up again. Don't take out, like, trying to, like, take over the system or whatever. And don't even take out the Missy scenes because, I don't know, I think it's interesting in theory what we're trying to do with Missy. I don't buy for a second that she's not going to be back to her old self by the end of the series. Either we kill her off again, or she's just back to being crazy evil again, but the idea of Missy as trying to reform, it's interesting, and I like that she calls the doctor out on his, like, ideals being sort of arrogant and they can't always hold up, but then of course the episode sides with them anyway, so that's just another. It seems like this episode's MO is bringing up interesting ideas, and instead of tackling them head on, instead of letting the story be kind of dark and cynical about humanity. Like, humanity is in a very dark place right now. And I feel like this episode thinks it's counteracting that by being a happy ending. But I don't know that that's what we need. Like, going into this episode, I assumed, based on how people talked about it, that it would be way more upfront about things. But instead, it's just acknowledging that humanity has to change, but then at the same time not really, because they don't change. And the story is fine with that by the end. And at this point I'm talking in circles, and I feel like I'm making my point less coherent the more I talk about it. But it's just, I don't know, there's not much to this episode. The few great ideas that it has, it does nothing with, and that's a real disappointment coming off of two previous episodes that I thought really tackled the ideas that it had with, like, if not an incredible amount of depth, at least with some maturity and confidence, and that's not here. I don't know. Is there anything that I'm missing? I took notes for this episode, but I haven't looked at them yet. Like, I don't know. I feel like I've covered everything I needed to say about this episode. There's not too much to it. I suppose, just as a last note about the whole Bill's mom being, like, the fix-it, I think that this is another thing that I can sort of pin on other episodes, because I feel like that maybe would have felt like a better ending had previous episodes handled that better, because I feel like when I look back on the few mentions that we've gotten of Bill's mom in previous episodes, I think Oxygen and Knock Knock are where we really give, like, remember Bill's mom is a thing? And I feel like in both of those instances, they were really forced, like, mentions. I feel like had we integrated Bill and her mommy issues more naturally in the previous episodes, maybe the payoff would have been better here, but making this story the payoff for that, like, part of Bill's character felt real inappropriate. And, I don't know. This was a weak episode. More disappointing than Knock Knock because I had higher expectations. Or even if I didn't have higher expectations, this had better ideas than Knock Knock and didn't utilize them well at all. I still think Knock Knock is the worst episode, and I don't know. Let's hope that let's just hope that we don't fall down to this bar again. I'm crossing my fingers that the rest of this series can be that we can get more thin ices and more oxygens and more extremists and more pyramid and less knock knock and less this. I really want us to end Capaldi on a high note, end this series on a high note, and I think we can do it. I don't know. This and Knock Knock are the low bars so far. And that's it.